Hello, everyone. Welcome to our Genealogy Jumpstart session today. I'm Katie Stilp. I'm the local history librarian here at Appleton Public Library. Thank you for joining us this afternoon. Before we dive into our program, I just have a couple of quick announcements. First, for those of us joining us in person, welcome to the library. I'm so excited to welcome you back. Finally, after a long wait of renovating our library, we're back and reopened. So thank you for joining us. Just a quick note about the restrooms. There are two restrooms located right around the corner from this meeting room. If those ones are occupied, we also have a larger bank of restrooms right across from the top of the stairs where you can find those. We also have a virtual audience. So for those virtual folks, we do have a Zoom host, thanks to Angie, who's our volunteer, who's going to be posting the link and helping moderate the chat in the virtual world. I have a couple spots where I'm going to pause throughout the presentation to answer questions. So for you virtual folks, you can put your questions in the Q&A box, and I'll get to those when I get a chance. For those in-person folks, just go ahead and raise your hand anytime you have questions, and I will stop and get those answered for you. We are recording today's session, so if you do need to leave early, or for those folks who might be joining us late, you can catch up on what you missed by going to our YouTube channel, and I will show you where those are going to live during today's presentation. This is our first Genealogy Jumpstart series, so just be aware that we are offering future sessions of this series. It's a whole series, so every topic or every session is going to be a different topic every time we host it. So some months, like next month in March, we're going to have more than one session. So you want to take a look at our events calendar, and I'll show you in just a little bit where on the APL website you can find that events calendar. And then we also have a landing page for the Genealogy Jumpstart series where you'll be able to see the different topics, the different dates that are coming up, and be able to click on those links to see more details about that topic, see where it's offered in the library. It's always going to be offered in these larger meeting rooms for those joining us in person. So for next month, our next session is going to be on Tuesday, March 11th. It's going to be all about birth and death records. And then our session on March 25th, we're going to tackle those marriage and divorce records. All right, we also have another genealogy series if you're not aware of. It's called Find Your Ancestors. So those are also offered every month. So during the school year, we offer those on the second Saturday of the month at 2 p.m. Central. So our next session is going to be on March 8th, where we're going to host Jill Swenson. She's going to be talking about how to decipher penmanship. Like you might have some records where you're having a little difficulty reading them. She's going to give you some tips and tricks on how to decipher that penmanship. And then she's also going to talk about how to deal with those misspellings. So if you've done genealogy research for a little bit, you know sometimes your ancestor's name isn't always spelt consistently. So join us again on March 8th at 2 p.m. Central, either in person at the library here in this meeting room or virtual on Zoom. If you've missed any of those past sessions for Find Your Ancestors, those are also recorded sometimes and posted on our YouTube. Unfortunately, we're not always able to capture all of them or keep them up there indefinitely, so try to attend live if you're able to. We have tons of other amazing library programs coming up later this month and next month as we celebrate our grand opening and being in the library again. So definitely check out our events calendar. And again, in just a few minutes, I'll show you where to navigate to see that events calendar. But we have lots of great stuff coming up. And then finally, for virtual folks, a survey is going to pop up after we close out today. For those in-person people, we do have surveys at the table. If you could just take a quick minute to fill those out, let me know what you thought of today's presentation. I'd greatly appreciate it. There's also a spot on there where you can let us know your email address and sign up for our monthly local history and genealogy newsletter. So those come out once a month, usually around that first week of the month, where it's going to let you know what upcoming programs we have. I usually try to throw in some cool genealogy tips or tell you how to use one of our databases, things like that, or sometimes share some local history stuff. So feel free to sign up for that if you're interested. So now I can go ahead and get us started here. All right, so first I just want to start with explaining what this series is. So this is our series that we're going to offer on select Tuesday afternoons throughout the year. If you joined us at Thompson Center last year, you're familiar with the series called Genealogy Series for Seniors. Well, this is kind of a revamped version of this. Like I mentioned in my introduction, some months we're going to have more than one session. Some months it'll just be one session. So there is a spot on our APL website where you can go for those dates and topics. So I'll show you what that looks like real quick. So this is kind of our landing page where you can learn more about the series. Down here, you can see what upcoming sessions we have, and then you can again click on them to be brought to our events calendar, see a little bit more about that topic, see where it's offered. For those Zoom folks, register using the link. And then if you scroll further down, we're going to have the link to the recording once I've posted it on YouTube. So you can click here to go watch those past recordings. And then there's going to be handout links. So for those folks who are joining virtual or those who are watching the recording, you can click on this to be brought to the handout. And then further down below, if you're interested in that Find Your Ancestors series that I mentioned, you can click there to learn more and be brought into the same or similar page for Find Your Ancestors, where you can see what we've got going on this year. There's also the events calendar. So like I mentioned, we have lots of other great programs through the library. So you can go to apl.org/calendar. This is our events calendar where you'll be able to see what we've got going on. So you can see all the different things. They're kind of color coded. So the red ones, for example, are geared towards adults. So like today's session, you can click on it and get like a little snapshot and then click on more details to be brought into that to see when it's offered, where it's offered, and all the information you need to know. This series is, of course, freely open to all, so you can join us in person at the library, like some of you folks are, or we are also live streaming it on Zoom, so we do have a virtual audience as well. Again, we are recording this and are going to post it on our library's YouTube channel afterwards. Each session is going to be a different genealogy topic designed to give you a little introduction to that topic. And then we're also going to provide some examples. And I usually do a lot of live demonstration of how to use our library's genealogy databases to be sure that you know how to use those resources that we have free through the library. You can, of course, take these sessions each on their own or join them all. I definitely recommend attending them all because we kind of build on some certain skill sets as we go month to month. But I understand sometimes you can't always make them all, which is why we also record them and post them on YouTube. Just a note, these sessions are not comprehensive. I mean, I could talk all afternoon all about each of these topics that we're going to talk about every month, but it's kind of your starting point of how to begin researching in that topic. We'll dive a little bit deeper into some of the resources offered by the library, but it's not going to be, okay, this is everything you need to know about birth records or everything you need to know about newspapers. That would take me a long time to go through. But I also give you some additional resources in your handout where you can explore a little bit more on your own. We've also got lots of books that the library has that you're free to check out as well if you want to dive a little deeper into given topics. For time-wise, if you're looking at, okay, how much money do I have to put in the meter? I'm trying to make it 90 minutes or less, but of course we're going to have questions and answers throughout, so some of them might be a little closer to 2 hours. And if you've attended one of my sessions before, you know I love to talk a lot. So sometimes I do go a little over that 90 minutes. But again, it's recorded. If you need to leave early or if you need to join us later, you can always catch up on what you missed through the recording. And then again, we've got that link to our Genealogy Jumpstart homepage where you can find further information, those recording links, and those handout links. And then again, like I mentioned, we've got our Find Your Ancestors session. So those are the second Saturday of the month during the school year. And then in the summer, we do them on Thursday evenings, June, July, and August. And again, we've got that link for that landing page. Before we dive in, I just want to let you guys know, genealogy is just not something you learn all the things and you're done. I've been doing genealogy for 20 years and I'm still constantly learning more. Of course, new tools are constantly being developed, new resources are added, or they change little things. As soon as you learn how to use Family Search, they change something. Or as soon as you learn how to use Ancestry, they change something. So this is all just to tell you to continually be looking for more and exploring more to enhance your research skills. And as much as I wish I could teach you every single thing you need to know about genealogy, you're going to constantly be learning as you continue your research. I just want to take a quick minute to note our technology skills. So like I mentioned, I will do some live demonstrations in our future sessions. So we have several website-based resources and database that the library has. Because, of course, genealogy is a little easier to accomplish online, but not everything is online. And so I always tell you also how to research offline as well. But with the technology stuff that we're going to do, I'm going to show you how to get there, how to navigate a little bit, show you some examples. I'm going to show you the important things that you need to know, like how to save a record, how to print something out, how to zoom in, zoom out, stuff like that. Again, remember that we're recording this. So if you're like, oh, that was way too fast of a demonstration, you can always rewatch that recording to refresh your brain on how do I get there and how do I do this and what do I click on. In the future sessions, you can feel free to bring your own laptop or whatever device you have and follow along during those live demos. We unfortunately can't go super in depth into all of the resources just because we don't have very much time. And of course, I can't slow down too much and make sure everybody's on the same page just because time-wise, we'd be here all afternoon. If you do need some further resources or assistance navigating those genealogy resources, we have one-on-one technology help that is going to be offered in the library various days, various times. It's on a drop-in basis. So just like I showed you the events calendar a few minutes ago, you can see those specific technology help times where you could come bring your own device and say, hey, I need a little bit of help using Ancestry Library Edition, or I need a little help doing this. And they'd be able to sit with you a little bit longer. We also have a couple of future sessions where we're going to dive a little bit deeper into some of our electronic resources. So Family Search is one of those big genealogy databases where I'm going to have a whole session just on searching on May 5th through the German Interest Group of Wisconsin. And then in August, in our Genealogy Jumpstart, we're going to dive into other areas of that site. We're also going to talk about building your family tree in May, and Ancestry Library Edition and Heritage Quest, which are two genealogy databases that we have through the library. We're going to dive deeper in June. So some of these earlier sessions, we might just get a little taste of it, and then we'll dive a little bit deeper later in the year. Then before we officially dive in, I just want to let you know who I am. So like I mentioned, I'm the local history librarian here at APL. I've been here since 2018. I have a master's degree in library and information studies from UW-Madison, and my bachelor's degree is from UW-Green Bay in communication. I already mentioned I've been doing genealogy for 20 years. Yes, 20 years. It's a long time. I've been doing it since I was a baby. I am not a professional genealogist, though. I'm just a hobbyist, kind of like most of you. So if your goal is doing professional genealogy, I would explore some further education. I can definitely get you started and show you some resources, but I'm not a professional genealogist myself, so can't teach you all the things you need to know to be a professional genealogist. A lot of you are going to ask questions throughout this, and I'm going to say, ooh, I've never done that in my own research or helped somebody in the library yet with that. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to refer you to places or refer you to resources where you can get started. Unfortunately, I just don't know all of the things with genealogy. If you raise your hand and say, hey, I'm from Thailand, I need to research my Thai ancestors, I'm going to say, all right, here's where I'd start. But that's not in my own heritage, so I don't know from personal experience. But I'm very excited for all of you to join us here and get infected with the genealogy bug if you are a new person to research, or if you've been researching a while. I'm happy to help you enhance your knowledge and your skill sets to help you learn a little bit more on how to be a better researcher. Any questions before we officially dive into our getting started? Yeah.
You mentioned about the library itself, and I came yesterday, I was looking around. Where are the historical genealogy books located?
Yeah. Sure. So we have a great local history section in the library right outside of this meeting room. It's kind of that circle shelving that begins our local history collection. And then if you're looking for more nonfiction things like the genealogy how-to books, those are going to be in our nonfiction, which is a little bit further on those taller shelves.
So if you're looking for
in the nonfiction area, because local history is going to be Appleton and our surrounding areas. Any questions from our virtual folks here? All right, so let's dive in. So now here's our official getting started in genealogy, what you guys all came for. So hopefully you already know what genealogy is, but if you don't, it is the study of families, family history, and the tracing of their lineage. So genealogists like to document facts. They want to know when a person was born, where they lived, who they married, who their children were. It's not just names and dates, though. Some people think, oh, that's all genealogy is. But we want to know who a person is, what events they lived through. A lot of people describe it as filling in the dash. So you have a birth date and a death date, and then in between you've got that dash. Well, we as genealogists want to explore what's in between that dash and learn more about who came before us. Of course, other than genealogy, you might hear it called family history or tracing your ancestry or your family tree or your heritage or your roots. Whatever you want to call it, that's what we're doing. That's what we're teaching in this series. It is the second most popular hobby after gardening. And for those who also enjoy gardening, we have the Great Master Gardeners series coming back to the library. It comes back on March 8th at 10 a.m. It's going to be a hybrid just like this, so you can join us in person for that or virtual on Zoom. But back to genealogy. Many people, of course, tend to do it when they're a little bit later in life, but of course, you can start at any age. Like I mentioned, I've been doing this for 20 years. Maybe you can't tell how old I am, but I'm in my 30s. So I started it when I was in high school. Thankfully, I had living grandparents and great-grandparents alive. But even for those who are older and just starting, you can still do genealogy without having any older living relatives. And I'm going to show you how in these sessions. So what we're going to focus on today is starting to document your family tree. So there are a couple different ways that you can document your family tree. You can do it electronically, you can do it on paper, you can use a mixture of both. It really depends on your skill set, what you prefer. I also recommend preserving whatever you find in your genealogy research this way. So printing out your stuff or making hard copies, whatever you find in libraries or in courthouses. Or if you feel like, hey, I want to have everything virtual, maybe scanning in those materials that you have hard copies of and saving them. Or again, doing a mixture of both. Every person in this room is going to have a different way of how they're going to do stuff. And that's okay. It's whatever your skill set is, whatever you prefer. It's your own comfort level. We're going to discuss a little bit about organization towards the end, and then I have a whole session all about organization that we're going to do probably next year. But today we're going to focus on some of the forms that you can use to document your family tree, either electronically or for those people who prefer that pen and paper, you can also do it that way as well. You could also create your family tree online, but we're going to have a whole session devoted to that on May 20th, where I'm going to talk to you about the different genealogy software that you can have or the different websites there are where you can take information that you might put in these forms that I'm going to show you today and have it electronically in a family tree where you can constantly be adding more stuff. So the two main ways that you can document your family tree are going to be through the pedigree chart and the family group sheet or family group record. It's kind of interchangeably called both. So whatever phrasing you want to use or whatever phrasing you find online for whatever sheet you choose, you can go with that. But I kind of use them interchangeably as well. So first we're diving into the pedigree chart. So the pedigree chart is going to track your individual family history back through time. Each person listed on this chart is directly going to be related to you. So you start in spot number 1 as the focus person, then you put your parents in there, your grandparents, and so on. So these pedigree charts, you can find different variations of them, but they usually show several different generations. So you might find one that has 4 generations or 5 generations or 6. It depends, again, on what chart you're using. But of course, as you research further, you might get further back than those 5, 6 generations. So you can continually add more pedigree charts as you trace those lines back further. And I'll show you some examples in just a few minutes. So here's an example of one of mine, and we'll dive a little bit deeper into it if you can't quite read it. But each company or website you might find that has these charts is going to lay it out a little different. So sometimes instead of this up and down, you might have a side to side. or they might display the birth, marriage, and death information a little bit differently. Again, it depends on each individual company, but they all essentially ask you the same information. So you're going to want to record the name of that person, their first, middle, and last name, their birth date and birthplace, their marriage date and marriage place, and death date and death place. And if you don't know that stuff, again, in March, we're going to dive into birth and death records and marriage and divorce records. So you'll be able to figure out how to fill in some of those blanks. But then, of course, you're going to have additional information that you're going to find on these people. So like I mentioned, we want to fill in that dash, learn about who they were, or what other children they might have had other than the direct people. And that information is going to be found in our family group sheets, which we'll dive into in a few minutes. But as we zoom in, you can see here, on the first generation, we've got Melvin, who is my great-grandfather. So I've got his birth information, I've got his full name listed, I've got his birthplace, marriage place, and marriage date, the death date, and death place. So that information is all featured on your pedigree chart. Then down below, we've got his spouse here. So again, her birth and death information. And then it continues on for each individual person as we continue on. So the top part of the chart is going to trace the paternal line or the father's line. So that's why I put it in blue, because we assume male is blue. And then the maternal line or the mother's line is going to be on the bottom. So this pink kind of color. So as you go generation to generation, just remember the paternal line is always on top, the maternal line is always on bottom. And then, like I mentioned, as you explore more and research more, you're going to need more than one chart. So here on this chart that I have, you can see up in the corner, it says this is chart number 2, because chart number 1 is going to start with me. I'm the focus of my genealogy. But then right here, it says person number 1 on this chart is the same as person number 8 on chart 1. And then on this one over here for Peter, you can see his chart continues on page number 11 or chart number 11. So he would be this number 1 person, and then his parents and grandparents and great-grandparents would continue on his chart. Does that make sense? So here is what my chart 1 would look like, with me as the living person in spot number 1, my parents in spot 2 and 3, my grandparents in 4, 5, 6, and 7. And then again, we have Melvin here, who it says his genealogy continues on chart number 2. So that's why I showed you chart number 2, because that's the continuation of his family. So when you're filling out the pedigree charts, you can either type them like I did, because I have terrible handwriting. You can handwrite them yourself if you think you have good handwriting and everybody can read it. Or you can use a website-based family tree. Like I mentioned, we're going to dive a little deeper into those website-based trees in May. Or you can do a combo. So you might start with filling out these pedigree charts by hand and then type them into a family tree on a website. However you want to handle it is however you can do it. What I recommend to get a physical copy, finding them electronically is going to be the best way. They do have some of them in some of the genealogy books we have, but they're a little more difficult to make a nice copy of them. So I usually find them online, and then you can easily print them and make a bunch of copies. So one electronic option that I personally use, that I showed you the example of, it's going to be through Missbach Enterprises. It's a completely free website where they have free genealogy charts. So I can show you quickly. If you go to missbach.org and you scroll down, there's a spot here that says charts, and you can click on view here. First, it's going to say, oh, there's all these other options here, but you see, oh, there's a cost. Well, I'm cheap. I don't want to pay for anything. So I'm going to scroll down, and here is a free 5-generation pedigree chart where you can just click download. And now I can type in my information, and then I can save it right up here in the corner with that little arrow and the line button. And I can keep saving this, keep filling it out, or I can print it right here with this little printer icon if I'm somebody who wants to handwrite that information out. And then, like I mentioned, we're also going to be talking about family group sheets. They've got a couple other different free charts if you want to explore those. But that family group sheet or family group record, here's where you would download a free copy of that. So just like you did with the other one, you can print it, save it, and fill out whatever you want in there. There's, of course, other free sites or paid sites where you can get additional family records. So any like pedigree charts or family group sheets. Choose your favorite, do a general Google search for pedigree chart and see what pops up and see what looks best to you. If you are going to handwrite your chart, I do recommend using pencil because, there's going to be things that, oh, you found a record that said this thing, and then 3 weeks later, you find a different record that says something else. So you might need to make some changes or, in case you miswrite something and need to change it quick, it's a little easier to do that in pencil than it is in pen. You might have noticed in my chart, I capitalize all my surnames. So some genealogists will say, well, this is a really old rule. We don't need to do that anymore. But I personally still do that. Why I still do that is some surnames can also be first names. So you can see Wesley Warren Scott, that's my great grandpa. Scott is also a first name. So I want to make sure that people know Scott is actually his last name, not his first name or one of his middle names. Some people also tend to have more than one middle name, or they might use a surname as a middle name. So I've got two other guys in my family tree. One is Ira Jesse Shepherd Holmes, so he's got two middle names. And then the other guy is John Stilp Sensenbrenner. Well, Stilp is his middle name, but it's also my surname. So I want to make sure people know that's his middle name and his real surname is Sensenbrenner. I also like the fact that capitalizing allows you to quickly see what the surname is. So you can quickly tell on a chart what the surname is when you're sharing with people or sharing with your family. Like I mentioned, not everybody follows this rule anymore, especially with the website-based family trees that you can do. A lot of people might not capitalize their surnames on there, or they might capitalize them on their pedigree charts if they're handwriting them or typing them out. Again, it's a personal preference. You do whatever you want to do, but this is what I personally do. One thing that everybody does do is list the women by their maiden names, not their married names. Because when you're searching the genealogy records, you're going to want to search by their maiden name before they're married, of course. And that's a really important piece to know. You also want to format the dates a certain way. So they kind of use the European format where they do the day, the month, and then the full 4-digit year. So you'd have 4 September 1976, not 4/9/1976 or 9/4/1976, because when you have a date like that, people don't know, is it April or is it September are you talking about? So by writing out that month, it kind of helps, differentiate what it really is. You can choose to spell out or abbreviate that whole month. Again, whatever you choose, I just would recommend being consistent. Most people abbreviate just because there's only so much room in those charts. I also recommend writing out as much of the location as you know or as you can. So you want to start with the city, then go to the county, the state, the country. So Appleton, we're in Outagamie County, we're in Wisconsin, in the United States of America. International, the same thing. You write as much as you know, using the different boundaries or the names at the time of the event. So for one of my German ancestors, I'm writing Malenz, which is in Kreis in Pomerania, in the country of Prussia. Well, that location doesn't exist anymore. It is now part of Poland. So I'm going to write that in there under his birth record where that location is. But then in the notes in our family group sheet, I'm going to write that location doesn't exist anymore. It's now Malianik, Poland. So if I ever want to go to Poland and see where my ancestors really were from, that it's now part of Poland and now I can see that. I also recommend putting your contact information somewhere on your chart, either near the top or near the bottom. It's really helpful for that because when you're making copies of that chart or handing it out to family or bringing it on a research trip with you, if it ever gets lost, it can get back to you because it's got your name and your address on it or your phone number or your email on it. And also people know who did all this research. What good is a pedigree chart if you don't know if Katie filled it out or Colleen filled it out? You want to know who filled it out and where that information came from. I also recommend if you're going on a research trip, you don't want to bring your original pedigree chart with you. You want to make a copy of it, leave your original at home just in case you do happen to leave it at that research place you're going to. And then that way you have that copy at home that you're not worried that you lost it. We always get all those free address labels in the mail. Put those to good use. Put those on your pedigree charts or put those on your family group sheets. And then you don't have to sit and handwrite all your contact information on there. I also add my phone number and my email just to give people more than one way other than my mailing address in order to contact me. Also, your contact information could have changed since you completed this or since you stuck that address label on there. Maybe you moved. Well, if people still have your email address or your phone number that maybe didn't change when you moved, now they can contact you. I also add a date on my pedigree charts and I update that date as I make changes. So now I can see, oh, I haven't updated this since 2019. What else has changed since 2019? Maybe we added additional kids to the family and now they need to be added. That's also why you want to, write it in pencil, or if you have an electronic copy, then you can easily update that date as you need to. Any questions so far about the pedigree charts? Any questions from our virtual folks? Let's take a look. How to use Swedish names on a pedigree chart. Do your best. So they're going to have patronymic, if I remember correctly, so that surname changes every generation with the father. So you're going to put whatever that surname is for that person, then put whatever the full name is for that next person in that next generation. So the surname's not going to be the same on that pedigree chart just because it changes every generation. All right, let's dive into the family group sheets then. So the family group sheet or family group record gives you a little bit more of an overview of parents and children, in a family unit. So each family is going to get a family group sheet, hence why it's called the family group sheet. It's going to show you some similar information. So it's going to show you names and dates, places of birth, places of marriage and death, but it's in a little bit more easy to read format, as you can see in the example. And I'll zoom in just a minute to show you a little bit more detail. So of course it repeats a little bit of information that's still on the pedigree chart, but it's primarily for your direct ancestors in the pedigree chart. So the direct ancestors are those people that you descend from. So it's your parent, your grandparent, your great-grandparent. Well, thankfully, on the family group sheet, it also lists collateral line ancestors. Those are going to be the other relatives, your siblings, your aunts, your uncles, your great aunt, your great uncle. Those people you might not directly descend from, but they're still a part of your family and they're still very important. So kind of the thing to remember is that pedigree chart is really for your direct ancestors. The family group sheet is those collateral lines as well as your direct ancestors. When you're first starting out, you may be tempted to only search those direct ancestors because, hey, you want to know who you directly descend from. But those collateral ancestors could be a key piece of information to help you in your genealogy research for your direct line ancestors. For example, as you start researching genealogy, you may say, hey, my great-grandpa doesn't have a birth record. He's my direct ancestor. Well, maybe his brother or sister had a birth record and it lists some information like their parents, and I know I can connect them as brother and sister. So that helps me. Or maybe a birth record is going to list, or a marriage record is going to list Germany as a birthplace. Well, Germany doesn't get me very far. It's a very big country. But his brother's marriage record, maybe it tells me the specific hometown in Germany, which I'm going to need when I want to research those German records to find out where my family's from in Germany. So takes that needle in the haystack and makes it a little bit smaller. Also on the family group sheet, what's great about it is it gives you a little bit more room to write down some sources, some additional details that you don't have room for in that pedigree chart. So like I talked about filling in the dash on your ancestors, you can put more of the dash stuff on this family group sheet. And it's going to list all the kids in a family instead of just the one that is descending. So for sources, I usually have a spot on the back where I add my sources. Since there's kind of a really small amount on these family group sheets, there's not a ton of information to write any notes or any sources that you might. So there's the whole back sheet. Sources are very important. They're so important. So please don't forget them, because there's a really big difference between Great Aunt Pat told me this date and, oh, I have a birth record proving this date is the right date. And now people who see my genealogy research will know, hey, she has a record proving that date. So if I think it's a different date, I'm going to check the record that she, put that source citation in there to see what it really says. There's, of course, some alternative ways to document your sources. You can attach a separate sheet to your family group sheet if you're handwriting it or if you're typing it out. Or there's, of course, the genealogy websites, which we're going to dive into deeper in future sessions. Or you can use genealogy software as well. So it's kind of, again, whatever you prefer, whatever you're most comfortable with. So with the family group sheet, each family unit is going to get its own family group sheet. So yourself, your spouse, your children, that's going to be one sheet. Then each of your children, if your children are married or have children, get their own sheet because that's another family unit. Your parents, yourself, your siblings, that's going to be on another sheet. And then each of your siblings gets his or her own sheet because, again, if they're married or they have children, they are a different family unit, even though you're all connected. So kind of the rule of thumb that I usually use is if the person is unmarried, they don't need a family group sheet because they're going to be featured on the one with their parents. But if they have a child or children, whether or not they're married or not, I give them their own family group sheet so that I can document those additional children. So for example, I'm unmarried, no kids. I don't get my own family group sheet because I'm already included on the sheet with my parents and my siblings. My sister, she's widowed, so she had been married. She has a child. Well, she gets her own sheet. My brother, he's the complicated one. He's got a biological child with someone he's not married to. That's one sheet. But then he's married to somebody who she has 3 children from a previous marriage. So that's another sheet there. So he could potentially have 2 or 3 sheets depending on how you want to do it. So he could have one with that daughter and the mother of his child. He could have another one with that wife and her first husband with her 3 kids. And then he could have a third one that's showing that he married his wife. Or you could alternatively kind of staple all those together and make a big note just saying they got married on such and such date. As you can see, family relationships are sometimes complicated. So you want to kind of make it as clear as possible for those future generations. So the better it's going to be if you can write it out clearly and make sure that kind of people understand even 100 years from now what situation happened. So again, now we're going to dive a little deeper into what the family group sheet looks like. So here is just a broad overview, and I'm going to zoom right in. So this is the top part of the family group record. So you can see at the top, it starts with the husband. So I've got his name at the top. I've got his birth information here and the birthplace, death date and death place, his father. I've got what date he was buried on, where he is buried, including the cemetery and location, the marriage date and place, and then his mother's name, including her maiden name. There's also a box up here in the chart that I have where you can check if there's additional spouses. So now I know, hey, Henry's got another family group sheet because he's been married before. And just for my own reference, I put in here, he had a first marriage and it was to this person on this date in this location, so that if I don't want to pull out that other family group record with Henry and his first wife, I have that information right there. But you could also put your sources in here if you want. Again, it's a small little spot there, so there's not a ton of room to write in there. Then down below, we've got the information for his wife. So it's basically the same information, that birth and death information, her parents, their marriage information. Of course, it's a repeat of what is above. And then I make a note like, oh, here's the volume and page number of that marriage. And hey, she's got a second husband and it's on this date in this location. And here's some information on her death that's a little bit more detail that I can throw in there. Whatever you want to put in that notes and sources area, completely up to you. It's your own genealogy, so you do whatever you'd like. Now, if I look at the bottom half of these records, now I can see all the children. So again, similar information to what the parents have. It's got the full name of the child, birth and death locations and places, or dates and places, their marriage date and place, and their spouse. But just be aware, you can sometimes maybe only fit one spouse in here. So this might not be all the spouses that they have, because again, they're going to have more family group sheets on their own if they have spouses, if they have children. So again, making sure that you're clear that, oh, maybe I'm going to put a number 1 here or a number 2, or put an additional note or put a star or something that's going to let people know this is not the first spouse, or this is not their only spouse. And then, like I said, on the back, or you can add additional page, I have a whole 2 pages of sources just on this family group record alone, because sources are important. We want to make sure people know where I got this information from, and I'm not just making it up, or I didn't just ask my grandpa and say, hey, what do you know about these people, and write it down. I might include that as my source if that's the source that I used, or if I used that in order to get to his baptism record or his marriage record, things like that. But you're going to want to use some hard records that you're going to locate, and we will explore how to find these records in our sessions. So again, just like the pedigree charts, there's an electronic version. So as you saw, mine's all typed out because I have terrible handwriting. So again, you can download it to type it in, or you can print it out if you want to handwrite. Again, I showed you that Miss Bach Enterprises that has the free version, or there's additional free ones out there if you want to find a different one. Same rules as the pedigree charts. You want to capitalize those surnames if that's what you're choosing to do. You want to use that proper date and location format. You want to list those women by their maiden name, and use that pencil if you're going to handwrite it out. The family group sheet is also a great spot to record nicknames. So you're going to want to remember those nicknames when you're searching records, because maybe your ancestor didn't use their legal name. Maybe they went by their nickname, or some kind of shortened form of their legal name. So for example, one of my ancestors, Wilhelmina, is her legal name, but she went by Minnie a lot. So in her family group sheet, I list her as Wilhelmina Minnie in quotes. So I know that that is her nickname that I find her under a lot of records in. But of course, you still want to record that legal name, because sometimes they're going to be featured under their legal name as well. Of course, there are going to be families that have more than 8 kids, so you can always attach a separate family group sheet and just make note that that's a continuation of the same family. Again, if they've got more than one spouse, you want to check that box and add a second or a third or a fourth sheet, however many you need for additional marriages. Even if they don't have kids, you want to document that in that new sheet. There's also, of course, again, more spaces for more information and sources. You can use that back of the sheet, or make a notation on the front of your sheet that that's where you're putting your sources. Or like I have a whole different file on my computer if I have electronically, where I can add more notes and more sources. Or if you have genealogy software or a website-based family tree, you can put additional notes and sources in there as well. Again, you want to fill in that contact information. So thankfully on the family group sheets, on this one at least, it has a spot on the very, very bottom where I can put whoever prepared it. So my name, my address, my email, my phone number, and then the date that I prepared it. So again, people know who did all this research, and if it gets copied and passed on to somebody else in the family, they know how to contact you. Maybe they're helping you fill in the blanks, or hey, this information was a little bit off, or hey, I have a picture of that 3rd great grandparent that you are related to, and I'm related to too. So that's a great way for them to get in touch with you. And again, you want to change that date as you make updates so that you and the other people you're sharing it with know when it was compiled. Or, like I said, you can see it hasn't been updated since 2019. Well, what information might I be able to find that I can add on my family group sheet, or, change? Maybe some additional family members have been added and I know I need to update it now because so-and-so had a baby since then. Questions on the family group sheets at all before we move on? What about adopted children? So you can make a note, however you want to note it, on your family group sheets that they are adopted. Once we get to the website-based family trees in May, there is a spot where you can make a notation if it's a stepchild or if it's adopted child, and what those relationships are. It's a little bit more clear in there. But for the family group sheets, you can use whatever notation you'd like. All right. So, of course, you might be wondering, well, how do I fill in all this stuff? There's lots of blanks on these, right? So we are going to use our pedigree chart and our family group sheets to start filling in what information we know on ourselves and our family members. So if you aren't sure, oh, I can't really remember the date my parents were married, well, maybe leave it blank, make a note to yourself on a separate sheet to find out that correct information. Maybe I need to ask my sister, or, oh, I think I know exactly where I can find that marriage date to know for sure that it's the right date in my head. It's okay to have the blanks on your charts and on your sheets right now. Even if you've been researching a while, I have been researching 20 years and I still have blanks on my charts and my sheets, so it's okay. It's gonna tell you what other research you still need to do yet, so that's okay to have blanks. Of course, like I mentioned, we're gonna talk about all the genealogy different records that we have every class, and that's gonna help you learn how to fill in those blanks and what records that you can use to try to fill in those blanks as we continue on in this series. One great thing that you can do between now and our next session is look around your house. See what things you might already have in your house that were passed down to you or you just have from keeping things. Maybe you've got some obituaries of people. Maybe you've got a family Bible, or maybe you have your parents' marriage record that was passed down to you, or birth records or death records. And of course, be sure to cite those sources. Where did they come from? Did your mom give it to you? Where did you find it? What newspaper was that obituary in, if you happen to know? Again, citing sources is extremely important. Please don't skip that step. So when I began doing genealogy 20 years ago, I did skip that step and I really regret it. I cannot stress how important it is for you to know where you got stuff from, because after 10 years, after 3 years, I'm like, gosh, where did I get that record? Who gave me that picture again? Your memory is going to fade. So be sure to write it down now when you find the stuff so that you don't have to worry about trying to remember where you got that stuff. So every time you're going to find something in your research, you want to write down where it came from. That's your source citation. Even if you already know the information in your head that you are putting down on your pedigree chart or your family group sheet, what records can you use to prove that that information is for sure right and not just relying on your memory? So your parents' marriage and date, like I said, we can prove that information with their marriage record. So maybe you thought you knew the place, but you come to find out it was actually a different place than what you thought. Well, the record is going to give you that for sure confirmation that it is the right place or it is the wrong place. Or maybe you're going to get additional information on that record that you weren't even aware of because you've never looked at your parents' marriage record. And all of a sudden you find out, what time they got married at, or, oh, they fudged their date a little bit, maybe. Why should you cite your sources? Again, if you come across some conflicting information, it's going to happen in your research. One record's going to say one date or one name, and then another record's going to say a different thing or a little bit different. So you want to know where the information came from. So you can kind of look at all these records and look at all the information that's on it and kind of determine what one's going to be the most correct. Again, it's also going to prove to other people it's based on actual research and not just your memory or not just made up or not something that somebody else told you. It's okay if it's something that somebody else told you, but at least write down, I got it from talking to Aunt Pat, who knew who her grandparents were and could tell me that. If you happen to lose or misplace or accidentally spill your coffee on a record, now you know exactly what page and what volume you can look it up again and get an additional copy of it. Or other people, in 20 years or 50 years, when they're looking at your research, they can say, oh, this is exactly where they got it from, and go recreate your research if they happen to not have that one record that they're looking for in the piles of papers that they inherited from you. They don't have to be perfect genealogy style. There is a genealogy style of citation, but unless you're going to be a professional genealogist, you don't need to worry about being a perfect citation person. There is a book, it's on the table back there, called Evidence Explained, if you really do want to make sure your citations are perfect genealogy style. It's Evidence Explained by Elizabeth Shown Mills. It's like the perfect genealogy citation Bible. There's also a site called evidenceexplained.com, which you can explore and see what all the different citation requirements are. Also in your handout is a link to Family Tree magazine, which has more information on source citations. Depending on how in-depth you want to go with them, feel free to explore some more on your own. But for me, I at least make sure I have 5 important elements in my citation. So the author, the title, the publisher, if there is one, the date of the information, the location. So what page number, what volume number, what archive or library did I get it from, whatever the call number is, whatever information I need to be able to find it again. So for example, I found this death record. I'm going to put that it's from Allegheny County, Wisconsin. It's a death certificate on this volume, that page, that date is when it was created. That's the person it's referencing. This is where I found it, the Winnebago County Register of Deeds office in Oshkosh. Now I know in 20 years, my niece who might want to recreate my research can go right on down to the Winnebago County Register of Deeds office, pull up that volume, pull up that page, and bam, there's the death record. Super simple. Again, it doesn't have to be overly complicated unless you're going to be a professional genealogist and you got to have perfect citations then. A couple examples of some proper source citation. Again, this is from that Family Tree Magazine article that I referenced in your handout, so you can explore it a little bit more, but this shows you like, okay, how do I cite the census? Or how do I cite a death register or a photograph? So it kind of shows you what different elements you can put in there and how to lay them out so that it's nice, pretty format. So again, feel free to explore this on your own to learn how to do those source citations. But again, don't make it overly complicated, just the bare minimum, whatever you need to do to find that stuff again is perfect. So as we work to fill in our family group sheets and our pedigree charts, we want to start with what we know and what we already have. So talk to your family to try and fill in those blanks further or get clues from them. So maybe your sister remembers what year grandma was born or where she was born. My sister doesn't. But you're going to take that information and you're going to find a source to prove or disprove it. So my sister might say, this is the year, or, oh, she was born in Green Bay. Well, now I know, okay, let me go search in Green Bay to see if I can find a birth record to prove that information that she gave me. Or maybe your cousin has grandpa's obituary and can give you a copy. Hopefully they know what newspaper it came from and what page and what date. But if not, we've got some resources that we can try to figure out where it came from so that we can go ahead and cite that source. Maybe you inherited somebody else's research, or maybe you found a family tree online. Well, you can use that as clues to help bring you to the sources. I don't want you to just copy and paste their family tree because you never know how good of a genealogist they are or the accuracy of their research, but use their family tree or whatever you find in their research as a clue. So if their research doesn't have a source attached, well, you kind of need to, see if you can find a source. But if they do have sources, you can look at those sources that they attached or printed out or have a source citation for, and then look at them to make sure, oh yeah, this really is my family. It makes sense before I accept it and add it to my family tree or add it to my pedigree chart or my family group sheet. Some sources you might already have would include some of these records, like the birth, marriage, death, and divorce records, which we'll talk more about next month. Maybe you've got some funeral cards or newspaper clippings or obituaries, family Bible, a diary or a journal, letters or postcards, photo albums, which are really great if they're identified. And if they aren't identified yet, try to write them as fast as you can if you haven't yet, so that everybody knows who's in those photos. Maybe you've got some recipe cards or some books that were passed down that are family recipes that are really cool to have, or some family reunion memorabilia, or some scrapbooks, or maybe you're lucky and have an oral history from somebody who's related to you, or some other notes passed down generation to generation. So, for example, I never knew one of my great-grandmothers. She died when I was 3 weeks old. But thankfully, in all of her stuff, I found she had address books and she had written things like, this is when my dad died, this is what his name was, this is when his birthday was. So all these notes from beyond the grave came to me as the family genealogist, and now I can, find records to prove that information that she wrote down was right. Of course, you might not have all this stuff, but maybe you have a sibling or a cousin or other relative who does have stuff and can give you a copy. Where's that box that you inherited from your mom or from your aunt, or who inherited that stuff that you can go talk to or go pay a visit to and explore what resources you have already in your family. You also want to think about what kinds of sources might help you to fill in those blanks. So start with yourself. then go to your parents, then your grandparents. So you want to start making a list of what sources you might want to get and where they might be located if you happen to know, plus your date or your date range. So for example, I might say, oh, I need to find grandma's birth record. She was born in February 1940 in Green Bay, so I know I'm going to need to go to the Register of Deeds office to get that birth record. Or, oh, I need great grandma's obituary. She died in October of 1987. I think it's going to be in the Press Gazette because she died in Green Bay. I can go to newspapers.com, or I can go to the Brown County Library and look at their microfilm. So I can start thinking of all these things of this is how I fill in my blanks. If you don't know the potential sources or where to get them, that's okay. That's what we're going to dive into in those future sessions where we're going to talk about this is where I find the different resources and what sources there are available for these blanks. And I'm going to show you that again, offline and online, because again, not everything is online. But of course, when you're making out your list, you're going to want to use exact dates and names if you know them, because it's going to make it easier for your research, of course. I know who grandma is, but if I'm making my list, I want to write her actual name or her actual birth date if I happen to know it and not just a guesstimate. You also want to think about what you want to learn about your ancestors, because these are your research goals. This is what I want to learn and what I need to fill in on my family. You can have more than one research goal, that's okay. So maybe you say, one of my research goals is I want to trace my family all the way back to their original home country. Or I want to locate my first ancestor who came to America. Or I just want to find out who my great-grandparents or my great-grandma's parents were. Or, hey, I want to create a book of 5 generations of ancestors who came before me. I mean, these are all research goals. Whatever goals you want to have, that's going to help guide what you're going to do in your research. So you need to think, well, what information do I need to accomplish that goal of mine? Where am I going to find how to get records for my ancestors back in their original home countries? What sources can I use to get this information? And I'm going to start making myself lists and places where I might start checking for that stuff. And again, we're dive into certain things like immigration or these birth, marriage, and death records or military records, all kinds of records we're going to dive into. But what's really great about goals is you should break them down into smaller chunks because it makes it a little bit more easy to manage and not so overwhelming. Because hey, to find all lines back to your home country, you have to go generation by generation to learn who your ancestors were before you can find somebody who wasn't born in the United States, unless you already know, oh, it was my great-grandpa. I'm pretty sure he came from Italy. Well, now you know, and you can still work your way back and find that out. But break that down by, hey, I need to find all the birth, marriage, and death information for my parents first, then my grandparents, and then my great-grandparents before I can get to that immigrant ancestor. You want to make your goals realistic, though. You can't expect to magically trace your family tree back 10 generations without a lot of time and a lot of work. I've been researching for 20 years, and I definitely don't have all 10 generations of all branches of my family tree done yet. So if you guys can do it in like 3 weeks, more power to you, but it's a lot of work. So you probably aren't going to be able to do this on all the branches of your family. There's just not enough records that exist in some locations. So we're going to have to deal with that as we dive into some of these records. If you really want to know a little bit more about planning your research or research goals, we're going to have 2 Find Your Ancestors sessions. So those are the other genealogy programs that we do at the library. One's in September on the 13th, and one's in December on the 13th. So you can again go on our events calendar or that Find Your Ancestors page to learn more specifically what they're going to talk about in those classes, but they're really geared towards planning your research and those research goals, which will help make things a little less overwhelming. Maybe you want to think about, okay, before I think about my goals, I want to think about what do I want to do with my genealogy? Maybe I want to make these cool pedigree charts that I display in my office. So I've got these in my office that I've displayed my research. Or I've written 3 out of the 4 books, one for each of my grandparents, that I've got their ancestors and their descendants traced with all these resources and photos throughout. Or maybe I just want to make this cool photo collage of my ancestors and my family. And look at how cute of a kid I was down here, by the way. I don't know what happened, but you can see, like, these are some of the things that you can do with your genealogy research if you want to set a goal. And this is how I want to pass down all this work that I've done and all this research I've done to my family. So whatever you want to do, we can make it happen. But then we're going to research. Of course, you need to research in order to fill in all the blanks and do all the things that you want to do. So again, we're going to talk in the coming weeks, the coming months about the various types of records you can research and how to research them. Once you have enough proof for each fact, you can add that fact to your pedigree chart and your family group sheet. And you want to make sure that every fact you're going to add is supported by sources. The more sources, the better. You don't want to just have one source and rely on that one source because that one source could be wrong. You got to weigh the evidence for each fact because there's going to be conflicting evidence. One record might say this and another record might say that. So you might find a birth date on a birth record, on an obituary, on a tombstone, on a death record. But guess what? That obituary, that tombstone, that death record, they could have one date and that birth record could have another date. Well, which date is right? It's not always majority rules, because if you think about it, that obituary, that tombstone, that death record, that was all created after that person died. And that person who it's about isn't giving that information because they're dead. They can't tell you this is when my birthday was. It was their kid who gave that information, or there's a brother or sister who gave that information that hopefully they were correct, but maybe it was a little off. So sometimes that one outlier source, which is the birth record, could be the source with the correct information. So there's something in genealogy called evidence analysis. So this is from the great Elizabeth Shown Mills. So that Evidence Explained book that I had mentioned earlier that we've got on the table that you can check out. She talks all about this research process of this is how you do genealogy. You need sources, you need information, you need evidence. You analyze it all, and that's your proof. And once you have that proof, you can add that information to your family tree. So you want to think about this whole process every time you look at a genealogy resource to evaluate it properly. And there's a link in your handout where you can explore this a little bit more and read a little bit more, because I can only go a little in depth into this because we've already got an hour down. So again, I could talk all afternoon, but I'm going to try to shorten it up for you. So sources, that's the first piece of the puzzle. Sources are going to be things like documents or registers or a publication or an artifact or people or website. These are all places where you can go to get information. There's going to be three basic types of sources. There's an original source, a derivative source, or authored narratives. So now we're going to go through each of them and I'll give you an example. So original source is one that exists as it was originally recorded. That's why it's original. So it's something like a birth record that is recorded in a county register of deeds office. It's something that was originally created for that specific purpose. A derivative source then is something that they produce that reproduces some or part of that information that might be contained in an original source. So for example, they could do an index of all the births that they have on Ancestry.com. But it's only an index. It's kind of leading you to the original source by saying, hey, there's a birth record for this person on this date in this location, which is cool to know. It's going to lead you to that source, but you don't want to just stop there. You want to go that additional step and get that original birth record because it might have additional information that you need. Some other sources that are derivative sources would be things like a transcript or a translation. Like if the original record's in German, and you need it translated because you don't speak German, that's a derivative source because there could have been a mistake in the translation, depending on how you got it translated. There's an abstract, so that's kind of taking pieces and kind of writing a summary of it, essentially. Or there's database entries. So, maybe as somebody's typing that database, they mistyped something incorrectly as they created that. So errors can happen or not. Not everything could be included in these different derivative sources. So it's always best to get that original source whenever possible. And then the authored narrative, this is where the person who's writing it is going to study a bunch of different sources, and they're going to kind of summarize whatever they find. They're going to reach a conclusion and develop this certain piece of writing. So for example, you could look at 20 sources for a person and write a whole biographical sketch on your ancestor. So the sources that you use when you write it, it might be original sources, it might be derivative sources, maybe you're even consulting some authored narratives. But whatever you're producing, that biographical sketch, that's going to be your authored narrative. So it's essentially you're kind of doing the analysis and writing it out. So that's your narrative that you're creating. But it might be created from original sources or derivative sources or all a bunch of different sources. So the key thing to remember is when you're doing genealogy research is to try to find as many original sources as possible and not just rely on those derivative sources or those authored narrative sources only. You might need to piece together the puzzle with a bunch of different sources in a bunch of different formats, but original is going to be the one that has the most weight for you because those are going to be the most accurate, usually. So each source is going to have information. So you want to look at the type of information that's included in each source, because the facts that are provided in the sources is going to determine if the information is primary, secondary, or undetermined. So primary is when somebody creates it with firsthand knowledge of the reported fact. So either they participated in, or they were a witness of it, or they just happen to know the event or the circumstances. So for example, primary information would be a birth date that's recorded on a birth certificate by a doctor or a parent. They witnessed that child being born. They can say with a fact, this is the birth date because I was there. Secondary information is going to be provided by somebody with secondhand knowledge of that fact. So maybe that birth date is recorded on a death certificate by the child of the deceased. Well, you as the child of your mom, you might know that date, but you weren't at her birth because that's not possible. You can't be at your mom's birth. You're not born yet. But you have secondhand knowledge because maybe your mom told you this is when my birthday was, or her parents told you this is when she was born. So that's secondary knowledge. And then undetermined. So sometimes you just don't have enough information to figure out where the information came from or who this information came from. Is it firsthand or is it secondhand knowledge? So census records, for example, we'll dive deeper in a couple months, but we don't know who gave the information on the census. So we don't know, is it firsthand knowledge if it's that person giving that information on themselves, or is it their neighbor who's giving secondhand knowledge? So just like with the sources, primary information is going to be the best type of information because it's likely to be the most accurate. So again, your grandma's birth record that was created within a few days of her birth is more accurate than saying grandma's birthday was February 26th because your cousin is giving you secondary information. Your cousin wasn't at your grandma's birth. They were, again, told that date. And it is my grandma's birthday tomorrow on February 26th. So now evidence, that's our final piece of the puzzle when we're doing this evidence analysis. So we're taking the sources, we're taking the information from those sources, and that gives us evidence to analyze. So evidence is going to be our interpretation of information that we consider relevant to a particular research question. So like we kind of talked about research goals a little bit, but those research questions are kind of what you want to learn. So those blank spots in your family tree, like, hey, I want to learn who was the father of Jacob Stilp? When and where was Jacob Stilp born? Those are research questions. So I can use certain types of evidence to figure out the answers to these questions. So there's going to be direct evidence, indirect, or negative evidence. Direct is going to be a conclusion about a relationship or a fact that is drawn from explicit statement that appears no supporting evidence needs to appear on it. So for example, your research question could be, who's Henry Stilp's wife? Well, I have a marriage record that explicitly states that Henry Stilp and Lida Lamel were married on April 22nd of 1897. That is direct evidence that this was Henry Stilp's wife. It doesn't need any additional information to support that fact. Indirect, though, it might be you need to reach that conclusion about a relationship or a fact from multiple sources because maybe there's no one source that directly answers your research question. So going back to the research question of who was Jacob Stilp's father, well, unfortunately, I can't find a birth record for Jacob, but what I can do is I can use several sources to prove that Jacob and John are brothers. So I have direct evidence that John is a son of Peter Stilp. And then I can indirectly conclude that Jacob is also a son of Peter because I can prove through multiple sources that Jacob and John are siblings. So if Jacob's father is the same as John's father, that gives me indirect evidence of who his parents are. Does that make sense? And negative, this one's a little bit harder to explain. But this is a conclusion about a relationship or a fact that is drawn because there's lack of expected information. And that lack suggests a certain conclusion or it can disprove a certain hypothesis. So essentially you use the evidence to rule out your theory. So for example, you might have the 1900 census with a family that has 3 young children. The children's are age 1, 3, and 5. And then 10 years later, when they do the 1910 census, that family only has 2 children, one aged 11 and one aged 15. Well, then I have negative evidence, and that would lead me to conclude that something happened to that middle child that was 3 years old and should have been 13 in the 1910 census. So maybe I can, conclude that child died, or maybe they're living with another relative. So that's negative evidence to me. They should be in that record with that family, but they're not. So something happened to them. It's kind of the hardest of the evidence types to understand, but it's similar to indirect evidence where you might need several sources to kind of prove or disprove your fact or your hypothesis. There's also something called negative findings, but negative evidence and negative findings are not the same thing. So negative finding is when you're searching for something and you don't get any results. So for example, I didn't find a census record for the family. That's a negative finding. But if you find that family and they're just missing one child, that's negative evidence. Hopefully that makes sense. But in your research, you're going to want to try to locate as much direct evidence as possible because that's going to be, again, the most accurate. You might need to rely on indirect or negative evidence because not all the resources you're going to consult will have direct evidence. Or maybe you have to rely on the indirect and negative evidence until you can find something with direct evidence. That's the fun of genealogy, is putting it all together. Questions so far before we move into the next phase? If my mother told me of an event regarding her mother, how do I cite this as a source? So you can write a, interview with so-and-so. I'm guessing you're not going to have an exact date when your mom told you that, but just write down that's where you got that information from. And then I would use that information I got from her to try to find some sort of other source to confirm or deny that information that came from your mom. Could we read one of your books for inspiration? Absolutely. You come find me and I will get you a copy. They get better as I went on. I got better at writing. But I've been working on my last 4th one for about 5 years and it's still not done. So things take a lot of time. All right, so more about filling in our blanks. So again, we're going to use our family group charts and our family group and our pedigree charts to see what information we still need. And I want to make notes about all the things I know or think I know about my family as I work to fill in those blanks, because this is unsourced stuff. So maybe I think, okay, I know Grandpa Doug was in the Navy. He probably served in the 1950s in California, but I don't want to add that to my stuff until I have sources that can prove that information and prove it with actual facts. I want to verify all these facts with my sources first. The more specific your details are that you happen to know, the better, because it's going to lead you to where you can search for sources. So having things like a geographic location and or a time period, that's going to be great. Even if it's a guess, it's at least giving you an idea of where you can start searching. So I know somewhere in California in the 1950s, I'm going to find my grandpa in the Navy. So where might I be able to find that information where I can determine where specifically in California and what year specifically he enlisted? Well, when we dive into military records, I'll tell you. But you want to keep stuff in mind as you're, filling in your forms, that they're asking for specific pieces of information in these forms. So they're asking for the vital records, the birth, marriage, and death records. They're asking about kids. But there's so much more information, of course. Like I said, we're trying to fill in that dash of our ancestors' lives. So you can learn more things that are really cool and interesting about their life. And you can start making notes on these people in a notebook or in your genealogy software or on your computer, however you want to make note of it. But you could write things down like, what did they do for work? Or when did they come to America? Or why did they come to Wisconsin? Or what historical events were they a part of? Or what social clubs were they involved in? What were their hobbies? What did they look like physically? There's all these cool details you can find out about each person as you start diving into the records. That's going to really paint a picture of who your ancestors are. And don't forget to record these own details about yourself, because your descendants, even if they haven't been born yet, they're going to want to be interested in 100 years. This is what my third great grandmother did for a living, or this is what hobbies she had, or what she looked like, things like that. So remember, there's going to be future generations that come after us that are going to want to know this stuff about us too. You want to make a list of the things you want to know and things you need proof of, because these are going to be the things you start to research in the coming months and the coming years as you start doing your research. You want to make a list of all the people you can talk to in your family to find out what they know or what they think they know. So again, make a list of those siblings or their cousins or whoever inherited mom and dad's stuff or grandma and grandpa's stuff. You want to search out your oldest living relatives as soon as possible and talk to them about what they know and what they remember or what stuff they have. Again, don't just copy whatever you find online or somebody else's family tree, because they might be an amateur researcher just like you and I, and their work might contain errors. You want to use their tree as a hint to see if you can find other people to talk to, or hey, I see a family tree online. Let me reach out to them and see, where did they get this information, or where did they find that photo of our third great grandmother? Because maybe they have more information for you that they didn't put on their tree. Again, talk to your family. I always recommend recording your conversations too. We have these really great things called oral history interview kits that are at the library. You can check them out right at this desk that's right past all the stacks of books. You can record your own memories with these. You can record conversations with family members and record their memories. So these check out for 2 weeks, and it comes with everything you need to get started. So it's got this digital voice recorder, this little handy dandy thing. In this book, it's got sample interview questions. It's got this cord where you can connect the recorder right to your computer. And it's got instructions in this book on how to do all that to be able to save that recording, because you don't realize how much you miss somebody's voice until they're gone, or how cool it will be for future generations to hear your own story in your own voice long after we're gone. So this is a great way to preserve those and preserve them in your own voice. There's a couple common mistakes as you start doing some genealogy research that I just want to point out. So you might find things like ages, dates, and places that just don't add up. Like you might see, oh, a child was born before a parent is born, or they're out of childbearing age, so they had the kid when they were 10 or when they were 56. Not possible. Or maybe they got married after they died, or a second marriage happens before his first wife dies, with no evidence that they got divorced. So there's little goofy things like that. Maybe somebody mistyped something, or they just weren't analyzing the record properly before they added that information. Maybe they thought, hey, it's the same person, and it's just somebody with the same name. Or maybe you see one child is born in New York, and then the second child's in Wisconsin, and then the third child's born back in New York. Well, probably not possible. Our ancestors aren't as mobile back in 100 years ago or 200 years ago. Or maybe they're missing a child. Maybe you have 3 kids, but they really had 4. So for example, my mom and my uncle are 11 years apart. So when I see other people document our family tree, my uncle gets left off a lot because they assume after my mom, my grandma didn't have any more kids, but she had a little surprise 11 years later. So things like that happen. So those are common mistakes that you might want to watch out for before you start adding stuff to your tree. So what I recommend doing is create a timeline for each person. We'll dive a little bit deeper into creating a timeline and how to do that in our future sessions. But what you do is you kind of plot each event in a person's life. Like this is their birth and when that was. And then I found them in the 1910 census, and I find them in their obituary, and I find them in this. And I start making a little timeline of their whole life. You can double check your dates, of course. Did you mean to write 1965 or did you mean 1865? Make sure you're checking that after you enter them or after you write them. Maybe every few months, kind of look back through your whole tree. Is everything entered correctly, or did I accidentally mistype that or miswrite that? Ask yourself before you're adding stuff to your tree, is that realistic? Does it make sense? Obviously a child can't be born before a parent. It just isn't possible biologically. Again, don't just blindly copy dates and information from somebody else's tree or from what somebody told you without doing your own research and finding that evidence, because that's how these mistakes happen. You just copy whatever somebody said and didn't realize that they also made an error when they typed it in. Maybe you're researching the wrong person because our ancestors, you think their name is nice and unique, but it isn't. I have an ancestor named August Kepschel, which I thought, hey, there's only going to be one August Kepschel in the world. There's like 5 of them. And one of them lives in Chicago in the same time as my ancestor is. So it's really fun to try to determine which is the right one and which one's my ancestor. But you got to look at the context clues. You got to look at their birth date, their middle name or their middle initial, their spouse's name, the kids' names and dates, their occupation, their address, all these little unique details that can separate August number 1 from August number 2 and August number 3. So you got to look at all this stuff while you're analyzing your records. So sometimes you might need to research both or all the people with that name in that area and create a little mini tree on the other August. And then as you locate records you think might be your ancestor or the other person that has the same name, you can properly evaluate that record and put it with the right person using those context clues and all the evidence analysis that we just talked about. You might, of course, come across records that just don't give you enough context clues to confidently put them with one person or the other. So hold on to those until you can research a little bit more, and then hopefully eventually you'll be able to place it with that right person. But, for now, you might have ancestors with the same name. I'm sure there's thousands and thousands of John Smiths in the world, and hopefully they're not in your family tree. Another common mistake is believing the index on a genealogy website is 100% accurate. Computers are smart, right? Artificial intelligence is awesome. They're trying to read handwriting, but even in the cases of humans trying to read those images and indexing, errors are going to happen. People just mistype stuff or things happen. For example, for a long time, I couldn't find my Stilp ancestors on a passenger list. And when I found them, they were indexed as Kelp, K-E-L-P, instead of S-T-I-L-P. So that happens. You might find something that somebody thought that was a K and it was actually an S, and it's misindexed then. Even if it's a record that's typed, errors can happen even in typed form or even on stones on a tombstone. That can be an error even if it's written in stone. So don't just stop at the index and think, oh, that's all there is, good enough. This proves that this information is right. Look at that actual image or the actual record whenever possible, because not only are you going to be able to confirm and make sure that the index is correct, but you might also find some additional information in the record that wasn't extracted as part of the index. So the index is essentially just kind of a snapshot or little pieces of the information from the record. It's not every single detail in the record. So the index can lead you to a record, but it's not the actual record. You always want to get the original record when you can, because again, we're looking for those original sources. The index is the derivative source again. And then just quickly, I want to talk about a couple helpful forms or different software things that you might help stay organized as you begin your research. So there's something called a research log. It helps keep track of the information that you find, as well as places where you have searched, even if you didn't find what you're looking for. So it's really helpful so you don't waste your time repeating research and think, oh, I already searched this and I forgot that I didn't find a record here already. Maybe a database was updated since the last time you searched, and now you can go repeat the search and make note of that in your research log. And it also helps make sure that you've done an exhaustive search of what you're looking for. So if you do decide to become a professional genealogist, there's something called a reasonably exhaustive search. It's making sure that you are searching all the available records for a specific person. So you want to make sure that you're doing that and not just searching 2 or 3 records and then saying, oh, good enough on this person. So what I personally do is I use a website called Trello. They have a completely free version. They also have a paid version, but I use the free one. That I use it to organize my research. There's also a really great template by a genealogist called Thomas McGinty. It's a whole Excel file, so it's like a spreadsheet that you can use. But again, find something that works for you and something that you're going to use. You can always just write on pen and paper, whatever you're doing, and keep like a little journal or a little diary of whatever research you're doing to remind yourself of what you did when you were researching. But for example, this is what my Trello looks like. So I have a whole genealogy Trello of, okay, this is stuff I need to do. This is a research trip I need to do. This is a request I'm waiting for or somebody I'm corresponding with. I've got all this kind of stuff that I need to do. And it's cool because I can also have different boards. So I have one for work, so I can keep track of all the stuff I got to do for work. I've got one for home, so I can put my grocery list and my bills and all that stuff in there. I've got travel, so I can, plan my trips to all the different places. And then I've got my genealogy one, and I can click on each of them and have my own little like pin board for each of them. So this is something that I find easy to do, but maybe somebody who's not as tech savvy wouldn't find this easy and would want to do a paper and pen version. Or this is what Thomas McGinty's template looks like. And again, there's a link to it in your handout for you. But he kind of goes a little step deeper by asking you to analyze your sources. What kind of evidence type are you having? And there's a spot for you to put your source citation in there. He's even got examples of the different source citations that you can just copy and paste and then fill in with your own information. So it's really helpful if you're kind of a beginning genealogist to kind of get in that habit of analyzing your stuff as you're looking at those sources and figuring out what type of source it is. There's also something called a correspondence log. So this is going to track who you've talked to or need to talk to, who you're waiting to hear back from, why you contacted them or need to contact them, and what the result was. So Ancestry.com has a free one. There's a link to it in your handout. They've also got lots of other free forms on their site. But I can put in here, for example, I ordered a birth record from Peoria County Clerk on January 10th. And then, 3 months later, I can look at this and say, gosh, I never heard back from Peoria County. I better give them a call and say, what happened? Where's my record? Or I need to follow up on that. Or, oh, I'm not going to request that record because I already requested it back in January. So again, you could use something like Trello or use something like this. That's what I do is I just have a separate little list in my Trello where I keep track of my correspondence. There's something called the ultimate record checklist. So when I was talking a few minutes ago about the reasonably exhaustive search, you want to look at all these different source types and make sure I'm looking for my ancestry in all of these sources, because these are kind of, the common sources that you might find your ancestor in. So this is kind of one of my most frequently used forms. I print this off or keep an electronic copy for each person. So I know, hey, I looked for their birth record. Hey, I looked for their marriage. I looked for their death. I looked for their baptism record and all these different newspaper sources for each person. And again, there's a link to your handout. It's completely free to download this. I believe they do ask for your email address though. And then you get signed up for their newsletter, but you can always unsubscribe from it if you don't want that. And then, of course, there are specific genealogy software. Some is going to be free, some have paid version. So there's things like Family Tree Maker or Roots Magic or Legacy Family Tree. We have a really great program that we did a couple years ago that talks about the different online genealogy resources and the different software that Ange Knutson, who is a local genealogist, did for us. So there's a spot on our YouTube channel where you can go watch that. So it's just youtube.com/APLREF, and there is a handout link or a link to that in your handout. But there's also non-genealogy software that you might use to help organize yourself. So using Microsoft Office, they've got Microsoft Word where you can write documents or spreadsheets through Excel. Or there's a site called Evernote where you can kind of keep clippings and notes of things. Or there's Trello, like I showed you. Or Google Drive, you can save a bunch of stuff in Google and have that all there for you. Again, this is all stuff we can't dive super in depth into, but if you're looking at, hey, I need to figure out a way to save my stuff electronically, you might want to come to our tech help times and ask them about the different resources and to show you a little bit of a preview of what they all look like. Or again, watch this recording where Angie talks a little bit about some of these things. Kind of the bare bones organization stuff, you should come up with a plan on how you're going to organize all your genealogy before you even begin, and make it so easy that you're going to actually stick with it. So there's kind of three main ways to organize, either using a binder, a file cabinet and folders, or doing it digital, or doing a combination of all three of these things. Again, it depends on your familiarity with technology or how you want to organize things, what amount of space you have in your house to store physical materials, things like that. We've got a whole YouTube video on organization on our YouTube channel as well. That will help give you some more tips and tricks on organization until we do a whole session in Genealogy Jumpstart on organizing your records next year. And then again, I want to mention one more time our Find Your Ancestor sessions. That's our monthly genealogy series that we do at the library, offered in hybrid, so you can come join us in the library or virtual on Zoom. Different speaker, different topic every single month. During the school year, it's the second Saturday of the month at 2 o'clock. And then in the summer, June, July, and August, it's the second Thursday at 6 p.m. Again, no registration is needed if you're going to join us in the library, but if you're going to watch on Zoom, you do need to give us your email address to get that link to join the webinar. Sometimes we record them and post them on our YouTube channel, but again, we don't always get permission from our speakers to do that, so sometimes we can't. But here's a look at our YouTube channel. So again, it's at youtube.com/APLREF. And then right here, you can see there's a whole playlist button. There's a playlist for our past genealogy series for seniors. There's a playlist for adult programs. There's a playlist for Find Your Ancestors. So this is our other genealogy series where you can just click on it and then it will start playing the most recent video. Or you can see all the other videos that we have on here right now. And again, sometimes they're only up here for a limited time. So like this one on creating an ancestor sketch, I have to take it down tomorrow. So if you have no plans tonight, go ahead and watch that quick one. It's just about an hour. And this is also going to be where we put recordings of these sessions, if you'd like to watch those. And then I'm going to tell you quick what else is coming up for Find Your Ancestors. So we do have the video of the Using AI one that we just did in February, earlier this month. Our next one's going to be March 8th, Deciphering Penmanship and Why Spelling Matters. In April, we're going to talk all about finding ancestral photos online and offline. May, we're going to talk about using DNA to find your hidden roots. And in June, when we switch to Thursdays, we're going to do all about gravestone symbolization and how to do a gravestone cleaning. If you have ancestors' gravestones that are a little bit dirty or hard to read, you might want to come do that. We're going to do a in-person only live demonstration at Riverside Cemetery on Saturday, June 14th. And then the back half of the year, we're going to be talking about how to reach out to cousins to talk to them about, your genealogy and how you might find your cousins. We're going to talk about reconstructing World War I records. Again, I mentioned earlier the setting goals to focus your research. We're going to do that in September. In October, we're going to dive into the Wisconsin Historical Society, which is a really great overlooked resource that has a lot more than just Wisconsin ancestors or Wisconsin resources. So Mary Rousseau is going to talk to us all about that in October. In November, we're going to talk all about voting records. And then in December, we're again going to dive a little bit more deeper into how to plan your genealogy and how to come up with that plan of how you're researching to make sure you're researching as thorough as possible. And again, just a reminder, we're going to focus a little bit more on the specific record sets in our coming months. Like I said, in March for this Genealogy Jumpstart, we're going to focus on birth and death records and marriage and divorce records. But before I wrap up, the important question is, do you have a library card? We all have library cards? I hope so. These are our new cute ones if you haven't yet seen them, but they have a cute little fox on them. We just got those with our grand opening. But this is why I think you should need a library card, and I say this as a genealogist, not just a librarian. but it is your free access pass to tons of genealogy databases. So we've got things like Ancestry Library Edition, which you can use inside the library only, unfortunately. We are a Family Search affiliate library. Family Search is a website you can use completely free from home, which we'll dive into in our future sessions. But what an affiliate library means is that you can come inside the library and get access to stuff that from home, they don't give you access to. We have Fold 3 Library Edition, which is a completely military-focused database. We have newspapers.com Library Edition, which we'll talk all about in our newspaper session a little later this year. We've got a passenger and immigration list index, which helps you find those immigrant ancestors. Heritage Quest is a website that you can use completely free from home if you live in Wisconsin that has things like census records or other kind of great resources that we'll dive a little deeper into in future. And of course, with your library card, you can check out books or movies or magazines to help you learn a little bit more about your genealogy, not only those how-to books of genealogy, but other things as well, like how to research World War I or World War II to give yourself some social context of what your ancestor who was in the war went through. I've got some books kind of recommended on the tables for you if you want to take those, and you're welcome to check them out. We also have a resource called Mango Languages. So if you're diving into those international records at some point where it's German and I can't read German, or it's Spanish and I can't read Spanish, you can use Mango Languages to learn the language of your ancestors and be able to decipher some of those records. If you do need a library card yet, you can stop at any of our service desks. There's one on every floor with your photo ID, and in just a few minutes, we can get you your library card and show you some of our cool databases. And just quickly, I want to show you how to navigate to those. So if you're doing it from home, just type in apl.org, and right up here, you'll see eLibrary. So this is going to give you an A to Z listing of all of our databases. So you can click on them from here, or there's also kind of little subjects called out. So you can see genealogy is one of them, or history is another one, or newspapers is another one. So I can click on them, and it kind of narrows down to just these subjects. And then from here, I can click on the databases. If I want to go into Family Search, I can click on it. Or I can also click on more details, and it's going to give you a little bit more information, like what you can use this for. I've sometimes got user guides or video links here for you to learn a little bit more about how to use these resources, or little tips and tricks down here. So feel free to explore that to learn a little bit in the meantime. And then again, just highlighting what we have coming this year. So like I mentioned, birth and death records, March 11th, March 25th, marriage and divorce records. In April, we're talking about cemetery research. We've got a special session on Monday, May 5th with the German Interest Group of Wisconsin, where we're going to talk all about searching and family search. So even though it's not technically part of Genealogy Jumpstart, you can still feel free to join us for that. In May, we're talking about creating your family tree online. In June, we're talking about Ancestry Library Edition and Heritage Quest, which are two of those resources I just mentioned that we have at the library. Our newspaper ones, because there are so many newspaper resources, is going to be in two parts in July, so on July 8th and the 22nd. Again, all these sessions 1 p.m. Central here in the library, or also live streamed on Zoom. And then the back half of the year, in August, we're going to talk about Family Search, which is again one of those resources we have. September, we're talking about census records. October, immigration records and naturalization records. So there's two separate sessions again. November, we're talking about city and some of the other directories that there are. And then we'll wrap up the year in December with religious records. So hopefully you're able to join us, or again, catch the recording of them if you're not able to join us live. So that's all I've got for you today. So thank you everyone for joining us. I'm happy to answer any questions or clarify anything that I, wasn't clear on. So any questions? Yeah.
Most of the research that people here and myself will be doing is pretty local and it's easy to find. But when you start getting back in time to the 16 and 1700s, and there, in my particular instance, on one line I'm working on, there's opportunities for about 6 books that have been written.
Sure.
And is there any reason to avoid books written by a certain individual.
Yeah, so like we talked about, those are kind of those author narrative kind of source. So you want to kind of, look at them with a grain of salt and look at what sources they use. It depends on, what information they're including in those. Is it like a written genealogy where they're, source citations for those birth, marriage, and death records? Or is it kind of more general, just about the history of the area and looking at kind of their bibliography that they would have used? Great question. Anything else from our in-person attendees? I'm going to take a look at our virtual folks here, see what kind of questions we've got. So someone said, if I have a Fond du Lac public library card, can I also have one of yours? Absolutely. So all you need to do is be a Wisconsin resident and you can get a library card through APL. You just have to come here and physically get it with your photo ID. How long will the classes be up after the presentation? For these ones, since I'm the one doing them, I don't have any plans to take them down at any time. So they will be up there for a long time. Thanks for asking. There's a couple of questions or comments in the chats here. Let's see. Someone said Lisa Alzo also has talks and a book about writing about your ancestors. So if you're looking for more information about that, you might want to check out her presentations or her books. If you're not a local resident, like I just mentioned, you can, as long as you're a Wisconsin resident, you're able to get a library card through APL. Someone, if they have a library card in Albuquerque, is this going to give me free access to all this stuff? Unfortunately not. So you have to be a Wisconsin resident to have access. There are certain things where you don't even need to have a library card for some of our resources, so you're able to explore those through the website like I showed you. But some of them, especially if you're accessing them from home, they're going to ask for your library card number, or they will tell that you're in Wisconsin or ask for your library card number or your zip code to determine where you are. But you might want to check with your local library. They might have similar resources. Thank you, Mary. Is May session available for virtual attendance? Yes. So that special German interest group one that I'm going to do on Family Search, it's going to be hybrid just like these ones are, where you can join me in the library or on Zoom, and we will be recording it. All right, looks like those were all the comments and questions. Oh, one more here. Is May, yes, I just answered that. So it is available for virtual attendance. So you can go to our events calendar and sign up for that on Zoom. All right, everyone, thank you so much. I look forward to seeing you next month when we talk about those birth and marriage records. And then those birth and death is the first one, and then marriage and divorce is the second one in March. So thanks, everyone. Take care.
Thanks, Katie.